Okay. Hi, everyone. On behalf of the LSE Alumni Association Mumbai chapter and the National School of Journalism, welcome. I'm Sonia Mesquita, the communications coordinator on the committee, and also the founder of Studio Jigsaw, which is a brand strategy and innovation consultancy. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Mr. Dorab Sopariwala, who has been actively involved in opinion polling, political analysis, and market research for the past 40 years. He is a distinguished alumnus of the LSE, having graduated with a BSc degree in Economics in 1966. Currently, he is Editorial Adviser with NDTV. In 2019, with Dr. Prannoy Roy, he co-authored The Verdict, a book on Indian elections. A very warm welcome, Mr. Sopariwala.
Thank you. As we know, we have a problem with my camera, so you will have to live with my name, unfortunately, and that's about it. It's a brand new computer. That's what happens when you use brand new computers the first time, or first or second time.
Yeah, I think we'll have to make do with that.
Yes, but the presentation is visible.
Yes.
Thank God for that.
Yeah. So before we begin, I'd like to ask members of our committee to introduce ourselves, and also Timothy from the NSOJ to say a few words. Amrita?
Hi, everyone. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amrita Bhatia Babu, and I am the chairperson of the LSE Alumni Association of Mumbai. I work in my own family business, which is an export firm called Metra Exporters, and I'm happy to be joining you guys today.
Hi everyone, my name is Sharan Agarwal. I'm the Students and Recent Graduates Coordinator of the Mumbai chapter. I'm an angel investor and the founder and CEO of a wellness brand in India named Leviosa, which sells yoga and fitness products. Yeah.
Ankit? I don't think Ankit can hear us, so let's move on to Timothy.
Thanks, Sonia, and wonderful to see all of you, and a joy for us to partner with LSE. I'm an alumnus of the 2004 batch, LLM, a lawyer, and we have some students here who have, they read up a bit and perhaps will have some interesting questions for Mr. Sopariwala later on, and really looking forward to this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So that brings us to our topic.
Jump in. Sonia, I just wanted to quickly say that Ankit is our events coordinator on the committee. In case he couldn't hear us, just wanted to quickly introduce him. So he's our events coordinator and he's actively involved. Over to you.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings us to our topic this evening, which is about simultaneous elections. So over the past few years, there have been suggestions from various individuals, organizations, and political parties in India that our parliamentary and state elections need to be held simultaneously. This is for two major reasons: that we have too many elections every year and that they are too expensive. So if India were to shift to simultaneous elections, what would the impact on our democracy be? So Mr. Sopariwala will weigh the pros and cons in his talk, which will go on for about 40-45 minutes. And we'll then open it up for question and answers. So you have any questions, just pop them into the chat. Or if you prefer, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you at the end of the talk. So without further ado, Mr. Sopariwala, over to you.
Good evening. It's delighted to be with LSI alumni and also faculty and students of the National School of Journalism. I'm terribly sorry, but my computer is playing strange tricks, so you can't see me. I don't think it's much of a loss, but you'll have to do with it. This presentation is based on a paper that I wrote early in 2020. It has been updated. The figures, I would like to say one thing to you. When I make the argument, the figures don't really matter. It is about principles. And what my view is, and I think the view of people who've been to the LSE, is that while we can all have our opinions, we can't have our facts. Facts have to be agreed. You can't have our facts. So this is the presentation. One nation, one election. This was first suggested by Mr. Advani in 1995 or so. In 2010, he wrote a blog. The main thing is, you can see italicized, is that fixed term legislatures, simultaneous Lok Sabha and Assembly polls. He said he spoke to Pranab Mukherjee and to Manmohan Singh, and they seem to be in agreement. Then he goes on to say, this is also true that most European democracies have such an arrangement. Then he goes on to say that recently had a word, this is 2010, with Nick Clegg, who also said that big changes were going to happen on fixed term elections. And Nick Clegg says emphatically, so Mr. Advani says, so this government has already set the date for which we think the next election should be, May 17, 2015. No matter who says what or whatever it is. That is the background. Where do we stand? 2019, Mr. Modi convened a meeting to seek their views. Some leaders attended, some did not. Naveen Patnaik, probably the longest serving chief minister, espoused this cause, and others want to think about it. This idea has two parts. Let's be clear, because we'll discuss each one term. Fixed term Lok Sabha elections, 2019, 24, 29, 34. Similarly, and secondly, simultaneous. So you have all the elections of the 543 Lok Sabha seats and the 4,113 Vidhan Sabha seats all at one go, right? Now, a lot of terrific backing for the idea. Venkaiah Naidu, the vice president, Sunil Arora, then the chief election commissioner, Sushil Chandra, now the correct election commissioner, and Mr. Qureshi, the ex-chief commissioner. So the backing is there all the way. Why do they back the idea? As Sonia said at the introduction, two main reasons. State elections held every year, policies can't be introduced, and expenditure incurred by the election commission and money spent by political parties. In the first 15 years of India's independence, virtually no government fell midway. As a result, Lok Sabha and Assembly elections were held together. Mr. Advani's backup was that most parliamentary democracies in Europe have fixed term elections. Before we go any further, let me make it clear, we must refer only to parliamentary democracy. That's what it's all about, okay? Even the UK has moved to the fixed term system. Is this argument correct? Regrettably not. As far as UK is concerned, he was somewhat misinformed by Mr. Clegg. Under the British system, in the old days, the Prime Minister could call the election just when he wanted. 1 year later, 2 years later, 3 years later. Now the rule is that he can call it only once, fixed 5 years, except if 2/3 of the members of Parliament, the House of Commons agree. So it's not really fixed term, it's sort of fixed term. You'll see later that how that sort of has worked. European democracies, including the UK, the facts do not bear Mr. Advani out. Let's look at the numbers. Germany is a 4-year term. There are 3-year elections. UK, the fixed term Parliament Act was passed in 2011. One election 2015, 2 years later 17, that is the Theresa May election. 2019, the Boris Johnson election. Italy, 2006, 2008. Spain, I need not even count. It's a 4-year fixed term parliament. Is this fixed term? Hardly looks like that to me. Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha simultaneously. That is Mr. Advani's other suggestion. And not only Mr. Advani's, let's be honest, there are many, many other people who support this. Now, we can only compare ourselves with a similar, and the largest federal parliamentary democracy in Europe is Germany. Germany, in terms of population, is somewhere between Madhya Pradesh and West Bengal, around 80-90 million people. There was a long article by Mr. Inderjit Hazra, who also referred to simultaneous German and federal and state elections. As Mr. Hazra wrote, in Germany, the Bundestag, which is the lower house, cannot be dissolved. A chancellor can be replaced only by a constructive vote of no confidence, which means if today we decide to sack a prime minister, in the same vote, you've got to appoint another prime minister. Don't dissolve the house. You sack him only if you appoint another prime minister. But you know, as night follows day, Article 67 is followed by Article 68. Article 68 says that if a chancellor himself goes to the Bundestag and says, give me a vote of confidence, and if he fails, a new election can be called. That is why you see in Germany, in that earlier chart, an election after 3 years, Mr. Schroeder went to parliament and said, give me a vote of confidence. Frankly, he wanted a new election. So this is the excuse they use. They've used this excuse twice in the previous century, 1980 and 1990 or something. So they say, give me a vote of confidence. Then you go and tell your people, we don't vote. Obviously, I'm not going to get a vote of confidence. So then I go to the president and I say, call a new election. Each of the 3 times, the opposition party in Germany has gone to the constitutional court and said, this is just a racket for calling a new election. The constitutional court has said it's valid. So what Mr. Hazra is saying is not correct. Then he says simultaneous elections. Let me ask a question. Can you have simultaneous election when some houses are for 4 years and some houses are 5 years? The houses, the lower houses, the largest states in Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia and Bavaria, have 5-year terms. The Bundestag is a 4-year term. How in God's name can you have simultaneous election? I mean, how can you write a piece like this? You're creating your own facts. It's not possible. A 4-year term and a 5-year term, how can they be simultaneous? Okay, let's give that a miss. Do they even stick to their own terms, 5-year terms? Let's have an example. Many states like North Rhine-Westphalia, Saarland, Hesse have broken even the regular cycles. So leave alone simultaneous elections, they don't even stick to the regular cycles. Let's look at this. Can you see my cursor? Sorry, can you see the cursor? Well, here we are. The federal election, instead of 4 years, 3 years. North Rhine-Westphalia is a 5-year term, 2-year terms. Hesse is a 4-year term after 2 years. Saxony-Anhalt is a 5-year term after 4 years. So all the national election and 4 states have broken these cycles. Let's see what the federal election here. There are only 2 states that went with it. And Mr. Hazra says the simultaneous elections. Where are they? They're not there. Creating own facts, not fair. Let's look at India. Our national elections, they are not dark because they've always been held after 5 years since 2000. But let's look at Delhi, 2013, 2015. Karnataka, 2004, 2008. Bihar, twice in 2005. Except for that, every single state has gone every 5 years. So Germany, there is much more churn than there is in India. India, except for these 4 states, everybody goes not the same year, but in the scheduled 5-year cycles. They don't break the cycles. India will break the cycles. We talk of disruption of India's business. The proponent of simultaneous elections say, India has an election mode all the time. Is that correct? Let's ask ourselves a question. Last month, there were elections in UP, Punjab, Uttarakhand, etc. Did it make a difference to us in Gujarat or Tamil Nadu? Fine, those states were disrupted. I don't deny that. But there was no disruption throughout the country, an election mode all the time. Each state is in election mode at Lok Sabha time and its own vote time. Is a short disruption once in every 5 years too big a price to pay? But is the disruption too short or too long? Maharashtra is the 2nd largest state in the country after Uttar Pradesh. In 2019, from the date the notification took place, the final date of polling, which means the time when you can't do anything, was 24 days precisely. Maharashtra. Bihar, it took 39 days, much smaller state, twice the 24 to 39. UP took 53 days. Jharkhand, which is almost a third the size of Maharashtra, took 44 days. Now, don't ask me. Since the turn of the century, there have been significant improvement, better cameras, better roads, better vehicles. Why the time becomes longer and longer? Why? You ask the EC, Election Commission, what do they say? In Lok Sabha elections 2004 to 47 days. They took 59 days in 2019. You know, if you decide to stretch them out over 6 months, you can do that. Is that, I mean, what are you doing? Bihar, you know, Bihar used to be undivided between and now it's divided in Bihar and Jharkhand. In undivided Bihar, 36 days. More time in Bihar, divided Bihar. Does it make sense? Jharkhand is a quarter of Bihar. They took 44 days in 2019. When 36 days in Bihar, when undivided Bihar, they could do in 36 days. In a quarter of Bihar, they took 44 days. Oh, there's a Naxal problem, that's true. Is that a new problem? So, it's the election commission. Why don't we ask them? Those who are pro-simultaneous elections, say elections cost money. They do. That's democracy for you. Dictatorship actually come much cheaper if you like them. How much do elections cost? Let's ask ourselves that question. There is no official figures, but there are estimates that I've picked out from organizations. What kind of money are we talking about? Let's first look at the facts. There are 542 Lok Sabha seats, 4,118 Vidhan Sabha seats. In 2019, all the Lok Sabha seats went to the polls and 414 of the Vidhan Sabha seats, which means about 10% of the Vidhan Sabha seats went to the polls. Out of 4,118, 414. The remaining ones went to the polls in the following 5 years. So 90% went separately, 10% went together. This is the estimate made by Bloomberg Quinn. CMS is an organization called Center for Media Studies. They made an estimate of 40,000, and according to the Economic Times, the budget provided for 2,600. Now let's assume the Vidhan Sabhas, when they go separately, will also cost as much. So we're talking of 85,000 crore. But that is being very naive. What about the black money? That's where all the action is. So let's add CMS an estimate of 15,000 crore of black money. So now the total estimate goes up from 85,000 crores from 115,000 crores. As I said, the figures don't matter. I'm only trying to make a point. But as they say, when the Titanic sank, that only a third of the iceberg could be seen, 2/3 were below it. So let's add a black Titanic premium to this amount of money. 30,000 crores. So let's make it 45,000 crores of black money in general election, 45 in state elections. So total number 1,75,000 crore. Fine? Fine. Of course, 90,000 crore is black money. That really is bad news. But then 1 out of 2 Indians used to paying a bribe. The good news is that money stolen from us comes back to us. We used to buy soaps and shampoos and saris and TV sets, all of which GST is paid, stimulus demand in the economy. But let's look at the annual cost in perspective. 1,70,000, this after all the padding they have done of 90,000 crore for black money. 35,000 crore a year. What was the dividend the RBI paid last year, the government of India? 99,000 crore. So let's not get carried away as if, the whole earth is coming down. After all the generous extra estimates that I provided, 99,000 crore. Let's assume democracy must be worth that much. Now, if you held them simultaneously, obviously you'd save money. So my 1 year cost estimate is Lok Sabha is 87,000 crore. If the two were held together, surely it wouldn't cost the same amount because you would have some economies of scale. You vote for Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha together. So let's assume it costs 2/3 over the 87,000 crore that I've estimated. So what do you save? 30,000 crore over 5 years, 6,000 crore over a year. Not enough to break the bank, I'm afraid. Now let's look at the time. There is 4 to 6 weeks disruption in the 27 states where voting is not at the same time. But with the EC around and the number of days they keep piling up, your 62 days might become 80 days. And we might close the whole bloody country down for 80 days instead of 62 days. So where is the saving in time, may I ask? But there is an impact on the democratic system. Let's look at the case of Maharashtra and Haryana in 2019. As you know, Maharashtra didn't have a clear majority. The BJP and the Shiv Sena together broke up So there's no clear majority. Similar Haryana, the BJP only got fewer than half the seats. Let's assume they were not able to form a government. So what would you have done under the rules of the simultaneous election? Governor's rule? I mean, governors, let's be honest, are party hacks. They don't know. They're totally useless people, most of them. There's some ex-civil servants, ex-army officers who are honorable people, but the rest of them, and it's not me saying it, the Supreme Court has on its own condemned these 4 governors. There may be many more. 2 from the Congress, Ramesh Bhandari, an ex-IFS officer in Uttar Pradesh, Bhutta Singh, who was ex-Home Secretary in Bihar, Vajubhai Vala, the Chief Minister of Gujarat in Karnataka, and our current governor, Mr. Koshyari. You know, Mr. Koshyari is supposed to nominate 13 members to the Legislative Council on the recommendation of the Chief Minister. For 2 years, he's been sitting on it. So now he's going to run the whole state. I mean, are we going to get a fair government? Another question. You know why the American colonies broke up with Britain? No taxation without representation. Let's look at Maharashtra 2021-22 budget. Revenue 3,70,000 crores approximately. Expenditure around 3,80,000 crores. Is Mr. Koshyari going to decide how those spent? Not the people of Maharashtra? Then, of course, something that's not occurred to anybody, Mr. Advani, Manmohan Singh. What happens? The central government falls. There is no provision in the constitution for presidents to rule the center. So what do we do? How do we pass the budget? How do we pay the civil service? How do we pay the armed forces? How is the country run? But you know, is it necessary to think of these things? I would think it is. But obviously it's not occurred to people to espouse this system. The central government took and fall. But then they turned around to me and said, hey, yeah, you're being unrealistic. This will never happen. Do you remember Charan Singh in 1980? Well, government almost fell. Chandrasekhar in 91, minority government almost fell. If the government had fallen then, what would have happened under this system? Who would have run the country? Or more recently, I'm sure even the younger person amongst you remember, July 22, 2008. That's when the vote of confidence held on the Indo-US nuclear deal, and the communists who were supporting the government decided not to support the government. The government squeaked through. Let's assume it had not squeaked through. Now, the left was never going to support the BJP. So no government would have been formed. What would you have done? Close down parliament? Close down the country? Close down the civil servants? Send the army to go home? There is no provision for president's rule at the center. So how do you do this? Someone could tell me. Nobody knows. You know, in a parliamentary democracy, the parliament is not supreme. It represents us, the people, who are supreme. In a parliamentary democracy, if you don't, you know, there is an executive and a legislature and a presidential system. The two are separate. In a parliamentary system, the cabinet sits within the parliament. So if it cannot command the confidence of the parliament or the legislative assembly, it cannot pass the budget. It cannot run the government. What do we do? No answer to that, except governor's rule. Do we want governor's rule for 4 years in a state? And governor's rule, not even a fair governor's rule. A governor running a state for 4 or 5 years without any representative people. So what is the answer? If you can't form a government, you go back to the people, which is what we do. How often do we keep going back? Well, you ask the Israelis. They've gone back 4 times since 2019. And the current government was formed 2021. So in 2 years, they went back 4 times. No, you can't run a parliament. You can't get your votes through. Go back to the people. The US and the Indian constitutions both start with the same words. We the people. We are the sovereign. We are supreme. We decide. Nobody else tells us. You don't have our vote, you are out. You must have our confidence to run a government. That is the way it should be. simultaneous elections, fixing things, you can't do. As you've seen, you couldn't do it in Europe despite there were claims. You can't do it in India. Every time a government falls, another government's by-election is called. In India, governments don't fall because MPs are often attached to ATM machines. So you buy them out from another government. But if you took the ATMs away, governments would fall. The governments fall another government. Simple. Thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have. Shall I switch off the screen sharing so the people can see each other?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So I believe that there are already a couple of questions that have come in earlier.
Yeah.
I'd like to call on Atul. Atul, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah. I can
So
hear
my
you.
question is, as you spoke about, some arguments that are made for simultaneous elections and how you countered them, that was really nice. My question is, what if the government in a state falls before the end of its stipulated time? Is it fair on the people who will have to wait for longer in such an election setup? Because all of us know that India is of federal nature, and our constitution grants several legislative and administrative powers exclusively to the states. So in that case, is it fair for the people of those states to kind of wait for next elections to happen?
For the next elections means simultaneous elections.
Yeah, true.
Of course, it's not fair to. My question is, at any particular time, a government in a state must have, or through the legislature, must have the confidence of the people. If it doesn't, it falls, you call a fresh election. In any parliamentary democracy in the world, there is no provision for people not being represented, or there not being a government in power which is in a position to command a majority in the House and pass the budget. The reason why parliaments became important in Britain in the 18th century, the time of George I, is that they controlled the power of the purse. The day you lose the power of the purse, you are out. It's not fair to the people to make them wait, because then who's running the government? You don't have the confidence of the people. As I said, we the people are sovereign. The House of Parliament represents us. They are not sovereign, we are sovereign. It may be unfair to us to ask us to go to polls again and again. But as I pointed out in India, except for 4 cases in the entire 21st century, no state government has fallen ahead of time. So we are normally voting every 5 years. Governments would fall except that we buy out MLAs and ensure they don't fall. But you cannot ask people to wait for 2 years, 3 years for the next election. It's not fair. And it's not fair because you can't run the government. How will you pass your budget? I mean, ask just that one question. How will you pass the budget? You can't pass the budget, you gotta go. In Israel, it's happened 4 times in 2 years and they've gone.
Okay, next question is from Gaurav. Gaurav, go ahead, ask your question.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. It was really useful. So my question is, so first, the most recent example of simultaneous election was Andhra Pradesh in 2019, where they had the election at the same time, and YSRP won both legislative and the national at the national level. So I feel like in 2019, the Pulwama attack, which happened, had a lot of impact in the Indian election. And in economics, we learn a lot about hot state and cold state. So many people took decisions with the hot state at that point of time. And so if we just give more power to the hot state for the entire 5 years, isn't it something bad? And the second part of it is that the accountability in terms of the government. So the government wouldn't do something wrong if it knows that, oh, the election's happening in Uttar Pradesh now, so we shouldn't bring anything controversial. Otherwise, they have the power to do anything they want if they get an outright majority for the 5 years, right? Yeah, these are the 2 points I have.
Cold state argument is a voting political argument. It's not a constitutional argument. What's the point you make about Andhra Pradesh going with the national election? Andhra Pradesh could have chosen, like its neighbor Telangana, to have gone earlier. See, you can, in India, like it used to be in the UK, a chief minister can call an election after 3 years. But that's his choice. And he does it sitting on a majority, not sitting on a minority. I'm not very clear about your question, because the hot state, cold state issue is a political issue. It's not, as I said, not a constitutional issue. And if next time Mr. Jagan Mohan Reddy decides to go separately, all he has to do is in 2023, which is next year, say, I want to go for polls. The Election Commission can't refuse him. He can do it. In fact, what I would suggest to the BJP, since they want it, is that let the BJP states, like say, which go after the elections, let them bring the elections forward. If all states voluntarily decide to do in 2024, I have no problem. Because then the states which are in control of the government are saying, let's bring our election forward. Fine. That is what you do. But you don't force them, whether the majority or not, to hold elections together. That is the issue.
The
Thank
next
you for that.
question is from Vikas.
See brown, brown, hawk out.
Vikas, are you there? Okay, let's move on. Okay.
Hello?
Hello, Vikas. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes. So, hi, sir. So, your talk was really insightful because online it's not very easy to find a lot of opinions about it. So, my question about
There's some audio disturbance. Can other people put themselves on mute?
The audio is not clear. Yes.
Hello, there's a lot of disturbance. So can everybody else put themselves on mute so that
I
we can
can't hear
hear
you.
the questions? Yeah.
may I continue?
Yes, go ahead, Vikas.
Yes. So, my question about this basically is that considering the fact that we are a multi-party system, and to be honest, it's really rare to see unity when it comes to any decision. So, there is a party in the center. It's usually very common to see that all the other opposition parties usually have something against it about it. So, say the government does go ahead with its plan to bring about simultaneous election. In that case, what exactly should be the game plan to convince the other opposition parties, and especially regional parties, who would obviously feel a threat happening in their own home turf?
In fact, Mr. Advani in his blog did say that Mr. Manmohan Singh and Pranab Mukherjee were favorably inclined to the proposal. The question is that what happens if a government falls after 1 year? How do you run a parliamentary democracy in a state where there is no government? That is the only issue. Some people are saying, let governors rule for 4 years. If you're okay with that, fine. I don't call it democracy when a governor rules in a state. Uttar Pradesh is probably the 5th largest country in the world. Maharashtra now has a population probably 120 million. Do you want one guy sitting in Raj Bhavan to run my state? So that is the issue. The issue is not if all the parties got together, they could pass an amendment. But in the amendment, you have to make 2 provisions. What happens if the government falls the state? And what happens if the government falls the center? Because even the constitution does not permit presidents rule at the center. There is no provision. So what do? We close down? We close down as a country for 2-3 years. We stop paying the army and the civil service. What do? We stop collecting taxes? Because you can't pass the budget next year, you can't collect taxes. Because every year the budget has to be passed. So what do? That is the issue. The issue is not whether people can get together. The people is the question whether you can, in a parliamentary democracy, ever have a long-term situation. Because don't forget, a government can fall 1 year after election or 4 years after election or 4.5 years after election. If 4.5 years after election, you can chalo, governor's rule chala do. Fine. But it falls 1 year after election, what do? As in Delhi, it fell about 18 months
directly
after
kotha bolar sujog ache to.
Now they can hear you.
That's the answer. I hear another questionnaire coming on. Is that right? I'm sorry, did you hear the answer?
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
I'm sorry, can't hear you. Not audible.
Am I audible right now, sir?
You're audible now. Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the answer. It makes things a lot more clear.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a question coming from Professor Bhattacharya
Yes.
on the historical context of elections in India. So
Yes.
Professor Bhattacharya, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thank you, Dorab, for very fascinating factual analysis of the pros and cons of simultaneous elections in India. I was wondering about whether he would like to reflect on pre-1971 period when Congress was more or less in power, at the center as well as in the state. So there has been a major changes in political party system in India. And BJP, even BJP today is not that kind of a political party that has, captured most of the states in India. So party system change should not it be a variable to consider such an analysis? Thank you.
I'm sorry. So what is the question? What is the question?
Question is, when we reflect about it, I mean, we had a system of simultaneous elections until 1971. I mean, and then the Indian democratic system ran because of the dominance of the Congress party.
Professor Bhattacharya, the question is that if the simultaneous elections, if all states decide in 2024 whether they've served 1 year or 4 years to ask for general elections, you can hold simultaneous elections. But the question that will arise is exactly what happened in India after 1965. State governments started falling midterm. The question is, even if you start in 2024 with the center and the states all going together, what happens if 6 months down the line, the government of one state falls? That is the issue, that it loses the confidence of the people. When a state government falls, you cannot run a government. So you either make a law that says that the center will run the government. Some people are suggesting that you have, supposing 2019, some people said have a midterm election, that some states go in the middle of the 5 years, some states go at the end. But the question still remains, if you don't have the confidence of people, how will you govern? In the first part of India's independence, all the states were run by one party. So no government fell midterm. This issue has arisen only because governments fall midterm. You can again start in 2024 by everybody going to the polls. The states that are not due for the polls asking the election commission, bring us together with the central government. You could start that, but it will break in a multi-party system. It will break down within 2 or 3 years. And then comes the question of what do you do with those states, for which there is no answer except governor's rule, which is in India with our kinds of governors, terrible, but even with good governors, unacceptable. You can't have an unelected governor running a state for 3 years, a state the size of 5 European countries. In fact, now most of our big states are larger than any Germany, which is, there's so many states larger than Germany, which is the largest European state. I mean, there is UP, there is Bihar, there is Tamil Nadu, there is Karnataka, there is Maharashtra. So, we were lucky in the first 15 years of our freedom movement, freedom. Then we have not been so lucky. But we cannot abandon democracy because we run out of luck. We must run democracy in the manner with parliamentary democracy in the way it needs to be run, which is with a government which commands a majority of the parliament or of the Vidhan Sabha.
Okay, I have a question. I mean, how likely is simultaneous elections? How likely is that process can it become reality anytime soon? I mean, we already see various people talking about it, several organizations, even past election commissioners writing op-ed articles about it. But
yes.
How close are we to it becoming reality? I mean, what is the process for it to become a reality, if it were?
The process for it is a very undemocratic process. That you decide, everybody goes together, and if a government fails, the governor rules. So you want an entity. I don't know whether that can get past Supreme Court. That's another matter. But there's no other way. You can't stop governments from falling. If they don't want to fall, they fall. But as you've noticed, since 2004, the year 2000, there are only 4 instances of governments falling. The only problem is, should we go together or go when we can start going together? But the question is, can we stay together when governments fall? What do we do? Just tell me what happens if the MVA government in Maharashtra falls tomorrow and no other government can be formed. The next election is due in September 2024. What do we do for those 2.5 years? You tell me.
No, the question is more legislative. I mean, do the state governments and obviously parliament have to literally agree, all of them have to agree to this, or can, the current government actually put this into?
Do you agree to? Yes, you can get, but what do you agree to? You agree to an undemocratic process where a non-elected house runs a government? It's unheard of in parliamentary democracies. We can start a new trend, of course. We're starting so many new trends. So one won't hurt us. You're saying that there will be no election. So let's take the example, say, of, let's say, Maharashtra or Haryana. They fall. Karnataka is due next year. So it's pretty close. But Maharashtra is due 2.5 years away. Rajasthan or Madhya Pradesh is due at the end of 2023. What do they do? You have to have, you either are a parliamentary democrat or you're not. I mean, you can easily run this by saying, forget parliament. Who's bothered about democracy and piffling stuff like that? I mean, easier things to have a dictatorship and finish it all up, yeah? Why bother about polls? You save money also. No time, no money, nothing. Why do you want a democracy? What's the matter with you? Bad teaching at the LSE, you learned all this rubbish there, that there should be democracies. There should be no democracy. Let's have a nice dictatorship. He can whip us all into shape. Yeah. Or she can whip us all into shape. We don't know.
So there are a couple more questions coming in. Sure. One is from Vinusha. Vinusha, go ahead.
I think Mr. Arjun Iyer has also got his hand up.
Arjun Iyer. Okay, let's call on Arjun.
Hi, sir. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, good evening, sir. It's an honor and privilege to be talking to you over here on this forum. Sir, I'm a final year student from National School of Journalism, and this is a question which I have regarding elections. So this needn't necessarily be with those elections, the double elections which have been discussing for so long, but this is in general about the way how elections are being fought and how governments have been run in our country for at least the past 20 years. So apparently a few years ago, if I'm not wrong, I guess one of the international organizations let out a survey, or I'd say more than a survey, a research saying that, political parties are becoming more extremist. Those who call themselves center left are going towards more left, and those who are claim themselves to be center right are going more towards the right. I mean, more towards the extreme ends of the political spectrum. So Mr. Dorab, I would like to hear your opinions on this as to, how this would potentially impact the way how democracies function in the future, because this was something which is noticed in the world's oldest democracy, that is United States. And I feel the same thing is happening in our country as well, seeing the way how, communal problems are arising in the country the past couple of months. So your take on this, sir?
You're right. It's nothing to do with the presentation, but it's a fair question which I'll try and answer. I think if you look at countries around the world, it's happening everywhere. Look at France, who's standing for elections, the presidential election tomorrow. Every state, I think many people attribute this to social media, the ability of social media that, we like to hear the echo of our own voices. We follow people whom we agree with. I make it a point. I'm exposed a lot to American elections, but I ensure that I listen to CNN, which I get here, and I also listen to Fox News. I want to have another idea, but most people don't. I'm a political scientist, so I need to know what's happening on two sides, but most people don't. And they only, when you only get fed one side of the story, and that side to become more popular and populist becomes more and more extreme. You have this problem, you can't avoid it. And you see what has happened in India in particular, is that there are no political ideologies in the sense that, as Arun Shourie said, the BJP is the Congress with a cow. There's no difference. They're all, the giveaways and the whatever's are all the same. I've said for many years that India almost since its inception, is a government of the rich, for the rich, by the rich. So that hasn't changed regardless of Mr. Chandrasekhar, Mr. Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, or Mr. Modi. It is, the fact is you are now social things are more divisive. You divide on social areas because you have no political ideologies. The Democrats and the Republicans are now fighting in America on social issues, on masks, and on vaccinations, which have nothing to do with helping the poor or uplifting the poor. So also in this country, whatever you do is by dividing people is easier. In the old days, the communists had an ideology, the Congress had an ideology, and the Jan Sangh, which is the BJP, or the Swatantra Party before your time in the 60s, was a proper right-wing party. Rajaji was the chairman of the party, Chakravarti Rajagopalachari. You had the centrist party led by Nehru, people like Nehru. You had the left-wing parties led by Mr. Dange, communists like him, Mr. Namboodiripad. The people like the giants in the old field, giants with different views. But then it all became one. And you divide on personalities, on social issues. You don't have an economic policy. Say Mamata Banerjee and Mr. Modi. And in the South, Mr. Prannoy Roy. Are they making different policies? I don't think so. Okay, there are always little swings to the little bit of slight variation, but overall their policies are the same. Tell me which of Mamata these economic policies a BJP government wouldn't follow. When the Congress comes in place of the communists in the South, in Kerala, same policies, a little twist here, a little twist there. Same also for the Congress and the BJP. Which new taxes has the BJP? The GST was thought of during the Congress, introduced by the BJP. So what's new, you tell me? There is no economic policy, it's all social. And things like Pulwama attack, these things, anything but the real thing. That's India. And that's not India alone. There's many, many countries in the world. Italy is the same. France is the same. America is the same. Brazil is the same. That's how politics is in this era of social media. Because now, a vast majority of people in the next 10 years will get the news in India. I'm not talking America, but India. They'll get the news online. They won't watch TV channels. Russia is one of the last bastions where 90% of people get their news from TV and they get it from state-run TV. So they're nicely listening to Mr. Putin's message day in and day out. No other country has that. India, we don't have that. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, sir. But can I just, so with your permission, I'd like to ask a very small follow-up question to this, if time permits. Yeah. So, sir, how do you think this would impact the future of elections? Like we have discussed about what's happening presently, but with we becoming the future generation of the country, and many more generations lining up, and they, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't think so, they will be able to think in such a way as how we are able to sit and think over here. How do you think the future generations would see such, sort of political, the thing which is happening over here, what do you say, the polarization of politics?
Yes, I think they will, I think you will see more polarization rather than less, unless the courts come in, or like in many countries in America, there was a poll recently where somebody asked, do you see the country breaking up in the next 50 years? And a fairly large proportion said yes. Don't forget, in the 60s, there was a movement in Tamil Nadu for a separate state because of the Hindi imposition. You are aware of the fact that in 2026, the new delimitation commission takes place. Now in America, every 10 years after the census, number of seats in the House of Representatives are redistributed based on the population. The same thing did happen in India until 1971. When the 1981 census, Tamil Nadu says, you ain't going to do this. We are following your hum do hamare do policies. Those guys in UP are going all berserk. So they're going to get more seats because of that. So since that 1971, the delimitation of seats has been on the whole. In 2026, we don't know what will happen, which will mean that Tamil Nadu must lose 3 or 4 seats and UP might gain 10 seats. So how will Tamil Nadu react then? Say we are leaving? What will happen? So this polarization will be accentuated because of the fact that the seats might be redistributed, but even without redistribution of seats, we are seeing greater polarization in the country because of social media. And I don't think there's any way that I can see. Fortunately, I'm rather old, so it'll be sure that I won't get to see what you will be fortunate or unfortunate to see.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Next question is from Kritika, who's raised her hand.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I can at least.
Thank you for your presentation, sir. My question is, do you agree that when we have more chances to do something, people tend to take it for granted? And with that said, how do you think simultaneous elections will influence voter turnout and voter motivation today?
Can you repeat your first question? I missed that. Didn't get it clearly.
Yeah, I said, do you agree that when we have more chances to do something, it is common psychology to take it for granted?
Like what? Give me an example.
For example, it's a very basic example. If I probably have more chances to complete an assignment, I'll probably push it for later.
You mean procrastination?
Yeah, and I'll kind of discount the importance of it.
Yes. Well, that is difficult to tell. I can't say. I'm a Libra, and Libras are masters of procrastination. So, I'm probably not the right person to answer this question. I'm sorry, in the meantime, I've forgotten your second question about simultaneous elections. What was the question there?
Yeah, my question was, with simultaneous elections, how will it influence voter turnout? Yeah.
I'm not plugging our book, but in our book, we've studied that because there have been times in India where there have been simultaneous election. Do people vote differently in president? Look at the question of Orissa, which went last time together with the central government. You're aware of that, right? Orissa voted in 2019, the same time as the general election. In some states like Orissa, the BJP did much better in the Lok Sabha election than the Vidhan Sabha elections. In the Vidhan Sabha elections, Naveen Patnaik crushed the BJP. In the Lok Sabha election, much closer. So the question is, do people split votes? That is your question. People splitting votes, there is no clear evidence that they do or they don't. In some states they do, they have done in the past. See, now we have few examples. But in the years when we did have examples, there was conflicting evidence. But this time in Orissa, they did split their votes. In Andhra, they didn't split their votes as much. So in America, for instance, do you know that hello, can you hear me, Ms. Prakash? Kritika, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. In the US elections this time, Donald Trump, who's a Republican, got 3 or 4 million votes fewer than other candidates standing for the Congress. So people do split their votes. So in some states, people split their votes. In some people, they don't. There is no clear evidence that one party would benefit. But the BJP believes that it could benefit because of Mr. Modi's personal charisma, which is not as evident. For instance, look at Karnataka. They swept in the Lok Sabha in 2019, yet they didn't do so well in the Vidhan Sabha in 2018. So people have the hypothesis of what would happen, but there is no convincing evidence one way or the other. Around the world, there is no evidence.
Right. Thank you for answering, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we have maybe time for one more question. Does anybody have?
Vikas has his hand up.
Oh, yes. Okay, Vikas. Yes.
Vikas coming for a second round.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yes, so I have 2 questions actually. So one is still regarding.
Again, will people mute themselves? I can't hear Vikas too well. Yeah. Yes, Vikas.
Yes, so I actually have 2 questions. Sir. So my first question is still regarding the concept of simultaneous. So my question with regard to that is that mainly the ruling party in the center is kind of advocating for simultaneous at this point of time. So what exactly are the political gains that they would likely have in case they go ahead with the constitutional amendments that are required to bring this into effect?
Because I couldn't hear your question properly, so let me repeat it. You're saying What does the BJP expect to gain if it does get simultaneous elections, right? I think it expects to do well in states where there's a close fight, like Madhya Pradesh, like Rajasthan, like Chhattisgarh, and probably even Orissa, perhaps even in Bengal, because it may hope that, Mr. Modi's presence brings a few people who have gone to Mamta in the assembly polls will come back. That is what the BJP expects. By the way, to have a constitutional amendment, you have to have, I think, 2/3 of Indian states approve of it. So that also has to be gone through. And then it can go to the courts for the constitutional, whether it's valid constitutional. So your second question?
So my second question is just about the elections that happen in India in general. So how important do you think ideology is in an election in India when most people tend to vote based on personality and maybe someone who is not very optimistic about the electoral thing and the politics that are happening in India would just say that most politicians are the opportunists in the workplace. So how important do you think ideology is in this in our country in specific?
Yeah, I don't know much about ideology. I think most parties have abandoned their ideology. So have most politicians. I have for long believed, and I said this on television almost 20 years ago, that an Indian politician works this way. Me first, my family second, my caste third, my religion fourth, my party fifth, my state sixth, and my nation last. My nation always last. I used to say in the old days, let me say one thing, in India, there are an incredible number of very honorable people who are in politics, very honorable people. But the vast majority, I would say, are those, I used to say, they would sell their mothers to the highest bidder. But I have now changed my view and I say, they would sell their mothers to the first bidder and not wait for the highest bidder. So that is the state of politics in India. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, sir. If you wouldn't mind, can I just add in another small question, sir?
You must take Sonia's permission, not mine.
Mr. Sopariwala, do you have a couple of more minutes? Because I think there's another hand in queue.
I think we finish with him very fast. We can go to
okay, we'll do it quickly. Yeah, okay.
So the whole concept of the left and right dichotomy, do you think it is applicable in India? Because sometimes you feel the BJP can be economically left wing by being culturally.
I think I've answered that question already. There is no ideology. Finished. Okay.
Thank you for that.
Now let Vaidehi go.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, I'm waiting for you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Vande, you are some name called Vikas. I can't hear. Okay, come on. I can hear you. There's something called Vikas on the screen. Anyway, why don't you tell me your question?
Yes, sir. My question was regarding
what?
Opinion thing. So since you're interested in that, right? I just wanted to ask.
Yes.
Whether opinion poll can lead to a change in the voting pattern.
You know, there was a long debate on this. There are two schools of thought. One, that there is a bandwagon effect, that, if they see me winning, more guys will come. The other says there's an underdog effect. If they see me losing, many people have come, will support me, those who wouldn't have come. Frankly, there is no clear evidence either way. There is a body in Europe which about 20 years ago conducted research in many countries to figure out whether there was a clear bandwagon effect or a underdog effect. There is no evidence either way. There's no evidence either way. But as you know, in India, from the day elections are notified, opinion polling is banned. In France, I think it's banned a few days before voting, but most countries allow voting all the time because the belief is that they did not have an impact on voting behavior. Of course, in half the time the polls are wrong, so it doesn't really matter if the effect is one way or the other. But that, ma'am, is the only view that I have on this. There's no evidence either way.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of a very interesting session. Thank you very much, Mr. Sopariwala, for your excellent presentation, for sharing your insights, and for spending part of your Saturday with us. and also to our audience for asking brilliant questions. I think it's really important for young journalists today to talk truth to power. And so what Timothy is doing with the National School of Journalism is so important and so commendable. So thank you for that. And our next event is on the 14th of May, where we will be speaking to venture capitalist Anirudh Suri about his new book, The Great Tech Game. So do keep a watch out for that on our social handles. Have a good weekend, everybody, and thank you and good night.
My apologies for the camera not working. Sorry.
It's not a problem. Sometimes these accidents happen.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.